Good morning. Well, I think I'll remove my mask for now. I was asked to share with us about leading small groups. And it's my first thought when I heard that was, well, why teach the whole church about that? Why not just teach the small group leaders? And then I realized, but not in a church like LCC. In LCC, everybody's a leader. Everybody is going to have a role to play. We are a member-driven church, so everybody's going to have a place in all of that. My life, I actually tried yesterday to sit down and count all the small groups that I had been a member of. And I lost count somewhere around 15 or 20. I've been a part of lots of small groups, fellowships. The first one I really remember being a part of was in high school. Our church had a weekly high school fellowship for high school kids. And we met from home to home, in the homes of the students. Sometimes they were in my house, and sometimes we were in someone else's house, but we moved from place to place. And we had some university students that joined us as mentors in that group. But mostly we were just high school students. And I remember not wanting to ever miss it. And it was okay, as a high schooler, it was like, oh, it's a good time to be with your friends from church, but also it was a place where we were challenged and we had to think about things, and we had to grow and had to take a stand. And then about the same time, there was a fellowship that actually I was part of a group that started it. That was also in high school. And this was not a church group, but it was a Christian group of people from various churches, and we started meeting together. Mostly high school kids. There were a few university kids there. A few university students there, not kids. And we met at one person's home who just invited us to meet there. And it became a very important part of my life. It's where kind of Sherry and I kind of got together. And went off to college, went off to university, and immediately found myself in another small group that was meeting in homes. It was that small group that introduced me to the church that we now consider our home church, and has been our home church for, well, it's been my home church since 1974. It's a long time ago, 1974, yes. Started going to that church. Sherry and I got married, and that church, almost right after we got married, started small groups. We hadn't had small groups up to then, but started having small groups. We joined that group, and I could go on and on and on. There are lots and lots of small groups I've been a part of. I can't think of any small group that I was a part of that I felt was not of benefit to my life, or was something I just had to do because it was like expected of me or something. Every small group I think I've ever been a part of were groups where I was drawn into that group, and I felt very much a part of the group, and it became a very much a focal point of our week. Typically, those groups meet weekly. And all of those groups had very different personalities. Some were very strict kind of Bible studies. Others were more fellowships. Others were more engaged in reaching out into the community. It's very interesting, when we started the small group from our home church, right after Sherry and I got married, This group of people came together. We were kind of putting groups according to geography, kind of where we lived. And it turned out that almost everybody in our group were in theological school, studying for the ministry, and everybody was very much involved in theological training, Bible study, and so forth. And I remember at the very beginning, we all decided we don't need another Bible study. We were all doing lots of Bible studies, and we decided we wanted our small group to be something different. And it's one of the strongest small groups I think I've ever been a part of. We met every week. We became very, very close. That group, haven't been a part of that group for more than 40 years, and yet all the people in that group are still very close friends to us. People we still care about and know. When I was given this topic, I thought, well, maybe we should just have a small group meeting today. Just do one. And I thought, the more I thought, I was really pulled in those two different, should we just kind of make this a small group? Because we don't have so many people that we couldn't do it, or we could divide ourselves into two or something. But the more I thought and prayed about it, the more I felt like we really need a kind of a foundation for small groups before we even try to just start doing one here in the church. So I thought maybe we should talk about that. Foundations are important. If you know activities that you're supposed to be doing, but you don't have a foundation for those activities, then those activities become kind of just expectations that other people have on you. And you feel like, oh yes, today I have to do X, I have to do Y, I have to do Z. But when there's a foundation for it, then those activities flow naturally out of that foundation, and you don't feel that it's a burden or an expectation. It's just part of who you are, part of who you've become. All of us, every one of them, you think of the strongest Christian you know, the person who you really think of as a hero in the body of Christ, someone whose life you really look to and honor and respect. All of those people, no matter how strong they are, have some issues in their lives or parts of their lives where they need to grow and mature. I was going to tell Morris that although some of the women in Jesus' lineage were shaky, I can guarantee you all of the men were. All of the men were shaky. Maybe some of the women were. I think they probably all were. But I can guarantee you all of the men in the lineage of Jesus were shaky. Because I know that all humans are shaky. Yes. I know that I'm shaky. I know that you're shaky. I know that Pastor is shaky. We are all humans. None of us are perfect. And being part of a small group certainly doesn't make us perfect, but it becomes part of that process of us becoming who we're supposed to be in Christ. Those of you who have heard me preach, and most of you have heard me preach probably more often than you'd like, but you know that one of the verses I use a lot is from Romans 12, where it says, don't be conformed to the image of this world, but be transformed by renewing your thinking, by renewing your mind. That's a verse I use all the time. And to me, it's so important that we realize that this is a command to us of something we're supposed to do. We're supposed to transform ourselves by renewing our mind. We're supposed to experience transformation in who we are by changing and renewing, growing, developing the way we think. And it's something that we're told to do. It's not something that God says, just sit there, I'm going to do it for you. It's not like that. Earlier in Romans, in the same book, Paul says, those whom God foreknew, he predestined that they would become conformed to the image of Jesus Christ. Now, see, if it's my responsibility to make me exactly like Jesus, I know I'm going to fail. But God says that's something that God's going to do. He's predestined, he's determined that we are going to be made into the image of Christ. And that's a promise to me. I can just claim it. I can say, God, make me more like Jesus. But then a few chapters later, Paul says, but you also have a responsibility. You have to renew your thinking. You have to change yourself. You have to change who you are. Small groups are a wonderful, wonderful way of doing this. They're a wonderful way. I wanted to start by asking ourselves some questions. In the Gospels, I actually had to look this up yesterday because I knew there was something here, but I wanted to go and look up the actual facts here on something. In the Gospels, the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Jesus asked 307 questions. 307 questions. He is asked 183 questions. So he asked almost double the number of questions that are asked of him. Interesting, of the questions that are asked of him, the 183, he answers 3 of them. He answers 3 of them. Most of the questions that are asked of him, what does he do with them? He turns them around and throws them back as questions back to the people who asked him the question. Yes. Now, some of us might get irritated with people who do that to us. Someone I asked, how do I get to Eastleigh? Someone says, so where do you want to go in Eastleigh? I just asked you how do I get there. I didn't ask you, like just answer my question. But Jesus did this all the time. Jesus asked far more questions than he answers. In fact, most of the teaching that Jesus does is by asking questions. Not asking who is the president of Bolivia. Not asking these kind of data questions that you might get on a school exam. But he asks questions about who you are and who you're becoming and what's important in your life. He asks questions that make us reflect and think into ourselves. So I want to start by asking some questions. I know you're already thinking, what do you mean start? You started 10 minutes ago. You should be halfway through by now. What is the purpose of such groups? Why do we do this? We do this because, all churches have small groups, It's the thing to do. It started back there in the 20th century, maybe in the 19th, and boy, we need to do this because everybody does it. Is that why we have small groups? If you have been in a church or you've been a part of groups or a fellowship somewhere that were made up or was part of a small group, and you think back on it, what was the purpose that group was formed? Why was it there? Why do we have small groups? Can I get anybody think about why should LCC start small groups? What's the purpose of these groups? Small groups are really funny to some people. Why have small groups?
I think there is much more involvement. When you have a large crowd, many people get to share away. But when you have a small group, everybody feels part of the group and they can be involved in every discussion.
It increases involvement, and you feel more free to be involved. Some people just love to talk like me, and I'm never shy to speak up in a meeting. But other people feel a little more intimidated than in a big group. But in a small group of people that they've bonded with, they become friends with, it's easier for them to open up and talk and share. give their opinions about things. So that's one good reason. What's another reason to have small groups?
I have a double one. It helps the people in the groups to grow, but also keeps people accountable to each other for that growth.
Small groups are a great accountability factor. You go to a church, okay, at LCC right now, we're still a fairly small church. But if you go to a church that's got 300 or 400 or 1,000 members or 1,000 people attending, you can easily just kind of lose yourself there if you want to be one of the lost attenders. Even a lost member you can be. But in a small group, not only do you grow, but people who love you and care about you hold you accountable. Not in a mean sort of way, but just because they care about you and you care about them. There's that accountability. What's another reason why we should have small groups? To strengthen our faith. Yes. To help us grow, to build our faith, to build our spiritual maturity. What else? Any other reasons you can think of why we should have small groups? Yes?
For support and encouragement.
Okay, yes. The support, encouragement, that part of being a part of a group of people that know you. Those people that say, we've got your back. That we're there for you. When there's a problem in your life, you don't really expect, especially if you're in a medium or a large site, you don't expect everybody to come crashing down on your house and trying to encourage, but you would certainly want those people you're close to come and stand with you through those hard times. What else? Any other reasons to have small groups? Yeah.
Sharing wisdom.
Say it again.
Share wisdom.
To be able to share with them.
Wisdom.
To share wisdom.
Wisdom.
Ah, I finally got it. Yes. To share wisdom. Yes, that's very true. Everybody in a small group's got something to add. When I train lecturers, that's what I do. And when I do any kind of a major workshop with lecturers, one of the first things I do with them is I go around the room and I ask every lecturer, how many years of experience do you have in teaching? How many years of experience do you have in teaching? So this one says 5, this one says 7, this one says 14, this one says 32, whatever it is. And I take them and I write them all up and then I add them up. And I say, okay, in this room we have 375 years of teaching experience in this room. Now, it would be foolish for either you or for me to think that I'm going to teach everything about teaching here when we got 375 years of teaching, or whatever the number comes up to. But whatever it is, it would be ridiculous to think that I'm the only one that's going to teach you about teaching, because we have tons, many, many hundreds of years of experience in this room. So yes, sharing of wisdom. Any other reasons? You basically have I'm ticking off here all the things I had on my list. You're doing a great job. You're preaching my sermon for me. Anyone else? What else? What's another reason? One thing I think that we haven't mentioned that I think is very important, and especially in a community church like ours, is that the groups become what? The kind of fancy educational term for it is they become praxis groups. They become groups that engage, reflect, think, and act in their communities to facilitate change. They're small pockets, especially if they're geographic groups, which they don't have to be, but if they are, people who come together in a certain area and meet. Can I give you an example of this? When we started going to Nairobi Chapel in 1997, started going to Nairobi Chapel. Just shortly after we joined it, they decided to start small groups. And they took names of all the people they had, and they plotted them out on a map. They had this huge map of Nairobi area. They put little pins everywhere where people were located. And we were living in an estate, some of you may know it, in Nairobi called Sunview, just next to opposite Kenyatta Market. And there were like 5 families from that estate that were attending. Now I'll stand over here. Anyway, that were attending Nairobi Chapel. Yeah, I knew you were gonna. Anyway, and so we were informed. We were just informed that these are the people that are going to be in your group. And I wasn't the leader or anything, but we were just told to meet. And so we met in one of the homes that was asked to kind of, what's the word? Yeah, I mean, they weren't even necessarily designated the leader. They were like conveners of the first meeting. I think that's the best word. They convened the first meeting. We met in their home. Most of us had no idea who the others were. And yet we were neighbors in the same estate, but we didn't know each other. That group became a real pillar, a cornerstone in us and in the community. One of the first things we did after going for a while, that opposite our estate, right opposite the gate, was this parking lot for Kenyatta Market. And it was actually a huge, monstrous dump. People had been dumping garbage there to the point where it was higher than a house, than a 2-story house. It was just a massive mountain of garbage. And it stank. It was offensive to see. The city council was doing nothing about cleaning it up. There was nothing happening. So our group decided, we've got to do something about this. So, I mean, it's a long story, but basically we organized the people in the community, we organized the people in the market, we got the city council, we got people to come, they brought in lorries, they brought skips, and we set up a day, and we were on TV that night. They had NTV, or I forget who it was, came out and filmed us all. They had Sherry there digging in the ground. I remember watching her, and we cleaned up. I think we took like 10 or 15 huge, these lorries that were going up and down our island, 10 or 15 of these lorries of garbage out of that day. Took it out. A couple months later, in the community, we had a residents association. And none of us in our small group were a part of that residents association, but we also complained a lot about it, like they weren't doing much. And so, long story short, all of the executive committee of the residents association, that came up for election. And everybody that was elected into the residents association leadership were members of our small group. The entire small group basically took over the residents association. And we repaired roads, we took care of the garbage collection, we took care of security, we made sure the street lights were working, and suddenly everybody loved living in our estate. It was like, wow, this is great. One of the purposes for small groups is to have a transforming impact on your community. Groups are different. Some groups may be Bible study groups. Some other groups may study books. They may do different things. Each group has to find its own ethos, its own character, its own way of operating. But find a purpose and then fulfill that. Fulfill that purpose. My first question is, what's the purpose of such groups? Second question is, what is the role of a facilitator or a leader in such group? If you were part of a small group, if you've ever been part of a small group and somebody else or you were the leader of that group or one of the leaders, what was the role of the leaders? What did they do? What do leaders do in small groups? They lead. They provide vision. That's what leaders are supposed to do. Rally the troops, provide vision. Twende and bene. Yeah. What else? They what? They guide. Okay? They provide guidance. I like what I said earlier. They ask questions. Jesus had a small group of disciples. He was constantly asking them questions. Constantly asking them questions. They encourage people to do something. They encourage people to get out there and be involved. They facilitate a sense of family and belonging. I don't want to be in a small group that's like a Zoom meeting for a class. Okay? I know that's not a small group for me. I'm sorry. I mean, I've been in classes, I've taught classes online, and I've even been in regular face-to-face classes where people come in, you do your class, people go out, they don't know each other, they don't have a relationship. But a leader is supposed to facilitate the sense of family and belonging. Leaders in small groups have to facilitate people taking action and doing things. Now, some of us who are used to very leader-centered groups may find that hard to do because we're used to making those decisions and doing those things. But in a small group, if you want people to belong and to be committed and to have that transforming impact on who they are, they have to be involved in those processes. They say that the best teacher in the world, the best teachers in the world are those who give you some ideas of where to look, but they don't tell you what to see. They have, to some extent, they have to avoid taking over and making decisions. One of the things that leaders often do in small groups is that they facilitate. They facilitate. They facilitate learning. They facilitate change. Now, my professional career has been trying to help teachers, mostly in universities, but in other organizations as well, to teachers to stop thinking of themselves as people who give knowledge to people. They have to stop thinking of themselves that way. In the 21st century, nobody needs a teacher to give them information. I can get more information on this little device than any teacher in the world can give me. I don't need a teacher for information. And if you think of yourself as a facilitator or a teacher in a small group as telling people information, then you've got your job wrong. You don't understand what you're supposed to be doing. Teachers are supposed to help people become people they need to be. Not just know the things they need to know. All of us, every one of us, have been in a classroom or some kind of a learning situation where we learned data, information that we put into our heads. We stored it somewhere, and either it just leaked out and we lost it, or we returned it. It's called an exam. But we returned it back to where it came from. Yes. We took that information that was here and we said, yes, the Pythagorean theorem is, the sum of the sides of the squares of the sides of the right triangle equal to the square of the hypotenuse. We've got that memorized. But we just returned it back, and it really didn't have anything to do with who we were. Many times, not always, but sometimes. That's the kind of facilitation or learning that we must avoid as leaders in small groups. That kind of leading, that kind of teaching, you want to call it teaching, doesn't facilitate the transformation by the renewing of our minds. It just doesn't accomplish that. Real teaching that transforms people helps people to think deeply. That's why Jesus used questions. He didn't just answer them. In fact, he rarely answered questions. But he incorporated activities and questions that made people think deeply about themselves and about their society. I did my doctoral studies in adult education. In adult education, we talk about three kinds of education, three kinds of learning. We talk about formal education, talk about non-formal education, and we talk about informal education. Now, formal education is the one that most of us can easily identify with. Those are those primary, secondary, university institutions where the driving force in those institutions is certification. You get some kind of certificate, something that says, I finished, I did what I was supposed to, I learned and you got some sort of a shahada to put on the wall somewhere. That's formal education. Non-formal education and informal education are a little harder for people to kind of grasp. They sound like they almost might be the same thing. Non-formal education is actually what we're doing right now. Church on Sunday morning is non-formal. Nobody's giving you a certificate for coming here. You didn't come here because if I go here for 3 years, I get a certificate that says I attended and I am now qualified to be a better Christian or something. We're not here because we're certificate driven. We're here for something else, okay? That's what we call non-formal education. If you have a group in the community that gets together and decides, let's learn how to do beekeeping, that's non-formal education. Informal education, the way I like to describe it is, how did you learn your mother tongue? How did you learn your mother tongue?
Listening.
Yeah, just listening. Some of us learned it easy, some of us learned it hard. Yes. Our grandson Declan, many of you know Declan. He's just beginning to put together sentences, real sentences, but sometimes they're a little hard to understand, And I somehow I kind of feel sorry for Declan. I don't know what his mother tongue is. I have no idea what his mother. Is it Kikuyu? Is it English? Is it Swahili? Is it Shang? Is it, or is it this conglomeration of all of these? I go to town these days. When you're driving in town, you see all these billboards, and all I can think of is I can't read any of them. They're all written in Shang these days, and I have no idea what they're saying. I have no idea. I can't read any of them. I think my Swahili is pretty good, but I can't read any of those because they're not written in Swahili and they're not written in English. And I'm like, what does that mean? I have no idea what that means. Keep driving. Keep your eyes on the road, Chip. Yeah. What was this?
There's a new word in town called Omoka. I don't know what it means. No, going at another level.
Yeah. Sisi wazee. They say wazee hukumbuka, but I think wazee wamesahauliwa. We don't forget, but we've been forgotten. Yes. Anyway, nobody's ever tried to help me understand. And the other thing I find, like with students at Daystar, is that they think Shang is actually Swahili.
Yeah. Unfortunately.
They're speaking, and I said, "Can you use Swahili?" They said, "That is Swahili." No, it's not. I don't know. I'm not sure what it is, but it's not Swahili. Transformative learning is that learning that gets people to think deep. If I tell you, here are the 5 most important points in the book of Romans. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Write them down, memorize them. Probably won't cause you to think deeply. But those questioning, that kind of teaching that makes me think about who I am and what's going on inside of me, that's the kind of facilitation of learning that our small group leaders need to be able to do. Learning to teach and learning the strategies is not something that comes easy to us. Because for one thing, most of us, our experience in being taught has not been very good. Most of our teaching that we experienced in primary school, secondary school, even university, has been this teaching where people are they want mwaga information on us, you know, and we're supposed to kind of hold on to it, at least until it's time to give it back. I actually heard a lecturer once at Daystar tell a group of students before their final exam, says, "Now I don't want to, in your answers, I don't want to see any of your thinking, I just want to hear what I said in class." And my thought is, can we please get this guy sacked? You know, he doesn't belong in any position of teaching. He says, "I don't want to hear your thoughts. I just want to hear mine that I gave you in class." This is, I'm glad you at least laugh at it, but even beyond that, it's sad. It's really sad. It's really sad. We have to get way beyond this. That kind of learning, where you're just putting lists and numbers and data, formulas, information, Bible verse memory even, you just put them in your head to give back somewhere else, it leads to a kind of learning that is external. It's outside of who you are. It doesn't change you. It doesn't have any impact on you. If you go up to Daystar during exams, walk on campus around the days that exams are actually going on, and you see these students coming in, they're coming through the gate, and they're going up to their exam room for their next exam. And they don't want to be greeted. They don't want you to even wave at them. They're like, "I have filled my button. I have filled it so full. I want to get to that room where I can just dump it out onto the paper." Huh? And then walk out. And if you gave them that exact same exam a week later, well, maybe not nothing, but yes. And it just shows that is not what we want to accomplish in our small groups. We don't want that kind of learning. We want learning that changes us. One of the things you've all heard me, I think most of you have heard me before. I was a very bad student when I was in primary and secondary school. But when I got to university, I found that I had teachers who made me think. It wasn't about making me know, it was about making me think. And for the first time in my life, I found a joy in thinking. I found this energy, this thing that when someone before had said, you know, read this book, you have to write a paper on it by tomorrow. I'm thinking, I got to read a whole book. But now, because it was about thinking, it's like, another book I get to read. Another thing I can pour myself into, and I can let it feed me and make me think. And I found this joy in thinking. This is what group leaders who are supposed to be facilitating learning in small groups, they need to know, how do I facilitate this kind of transformation when I'm facilitating? When we think about training or learning, whatever you're going to do in your small groups, I'm assuming there's going to be at some level of teaching, learning, facilitation going on. That learning has to be transformative. It has to help people become something that they're not already. It has to help them change and grow. It's not about knowing more, it's about becoming more. A student that's studying biology at Daystar needs to be able to think, have the world view, have the approach to life. If they're studying biology, they need to be able to have that worldview, that approach, that understanding of a biologist, not just to be able to tell you about biology. It's becoming over knowing. Knowing's important, but knowing is just a means to becoming. Have you ever learned something where you understood it, but it never really changed who you were? Yeah, you understood it, made sense to you, but it didn't change who you were on the inside. I give the example, I'm sorry, I guess I repeat my sermon, sorry. I give the example of the nursing students who are learning all about healthcare and diseases. They learn about how colds come and go and how you get a cold, how you get different diseases. And they know that colds are caused by viruses. They know that. And that you can only get a cold if you get the virus from somebody else who already has the virus. That's the only way you can get a cold. And yet those same students who are learning nursing and are learning medical procedures, when they go home at night and their child goes out to play in this weather, they put a sweater and a hat and a scarf on them because they don't want the child to get a cold. But you can't get a cold from cold weather, and they know it. They know it, but it hasn't become a part of who they are. Now, there's other reasons why you might want to put a sweater and so forth. That's not a bad thing to do. But it won't stop anyone from getting a cold. You get a cold from somebody who has a cold. The only way you can get a cold is to get it from someone who has the virus. You can't get it any other possible way. And yet, here are medical students, actually, who have the learning that they're having has never become a part of who they are. They've never made meaning out of it. They can make sense out of it. They can write an exam about viruses and which virus causes this and blah, blah, blah. They can do all that. But it hasn't changed who they are. We must avoid such teaching in our small groups. Also, we must think of the kind of facilitation that we do in our small groups as helping people to create themselves, create knowledge, and create their futures. That is not about telling them who they're going to be. It's like I said earlier, the best teacher is not the one who can tell you where to look but doesn't tell you what to see. When I went to university, I had one lecturer, my very first lecturer I ever had, English course, Dr. Knudsen, who sat down with me one day and told me, I don't even think he knew what my major was. I was taking an English class. I was not an English major, but I was taking his English class. I was preparing for ministry. At that time, I was a theology major. I don't think he said, Chip, you're going to be a great theologian. He didn't say that to me. He didn't tell me who I was going to become. But he did say, you're going to be a success here in university. And that you're smart and you're going to do well. And that helped me change. It helped me realize something new about myself. And finally, the final thing about facilitating learning in small groups is that what's really important is the learning, not the teaching. It's not important to be a great teacher. What's important is to have great learners. if you teach and people don't grow and they don't change, well then you haven't done much of a job as a teacher. Teaching is only a means to an end. We can say, okay, in our small groups, we're going to have teaching on X, we're going to have teaching on Y, and you can give them great curriculum, and they can have great speakers who tell wonderful stories and all of that. But if people don't change, then there hasn't been any learning. Learning is more important than teaching. Learning is more important than teaching. As we begin this process of relaunching our small groups, those of us who have been around in the church for a while realize that we used to have small groups and met here, right here in the church, and kind of they disintegrated and we're getting ready to relaunch them. We need to ask ourselves those questions again, the ones I started with today. What's the purpose of our groups? What's the role of the facilitator? And how do we, of the leader, and how do we facilitate change, growth, transformation in the lives of the people in our small groups? If we can do answer those three questions well and begin to act on them, we will have a really powerful small group ministry at LCC. Back over to our service leader.